Good day, class. Maayong buntag. Let's now talk about another lesson for this unit, and that is critical reading strategies in literature. This is a lesson that will end Unit 1 in terms of the discussions of literary reading or different contexts of literary reading. No? So, in talking about critical reading strategies in literature, we need to remember that in this lesson, we need to differentiate the various critical reading strategies and their uses and analyze a literary text using different critical reading strategies. So over this unit, we were able to learn different contexts, biographical, sociocultural, and linguistic context. Now let's try to understand what are these critical reading strategies that we need to incorporate. Now, let's think about this very essential question over the course of our discussion. What does it mean to critique someone's work? If you were a writer of, or if you were writing a poem and your classmate would critique your work, what does it mean for you to be able to critique that work, right? In terms of the technicalities or in terms of the appeal to you, being objective about it and being non biased. Let's talk about all those things in this particular lesson. Okay, let's review what we have learned in the module and let's try to deepen our understanding with this lesson, right? Now, allow me to begin first by decoding these challenging or unfamiliar words that we will encounter along this lesson. First, critique. Critique is a noun which means a detailed analysis and evaluation of something. Example, our literature professor wrote an interesting critique of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. Second, arguments. Arguments is a noun which means a set of reasons given to prove a statement or a stand. Example, I will side with you because you have convinced me with your arguments. Third, infer. Infer is a verb which means to form an opinion from evidence, to reach a conclusion based on facts. Example, using the data we have gathered, we may infer that the water has been contaminated by mining activities. Fourth, annotate. Annotate is a verb which means to make or furnish critical explanatory notes or comments. Example of this, be sure to annotate your source material for easier citation later. Fifth, defiant. Defiant is an adjective which means refusing to follow something or someone. Example, Fiona was defiant when it comes to following uniform regulations. So these are the five unfamiliar words that we are going to encounter with our discussion for this particular lesson. So make sure that you are taking notes on the meaning and the examples given so that we may be able to understand them better in our discussion. Now, let's talk about the mode of analysis according to Daniel Kurland in 2000. What a text says is the restatement. Meaning to say, kung ano yung sinabi ng particular text, article, or literary piece is a restatement of the previously conceived thought of the writer or the author. What a text does is the description. What the text is trying to convey in terms of the action that we need to do is actually the description of a particular subject matter. And what a text means is our interpretation. So it varies based on how well or how versed we are with a particular discipline or expertise. Now, we have the three main goals of critical reading. First, we need to recognize the author's purpose. What is the author trying to convey? What's the intent of this particular text, article, or literary piece? O say, rason sa author. What's the purpose? Why the author is writing this? Second, we need to understand the tone. What's the mood or the emotion? Is it a happy perspective, a sad perspective, an activist's perspective? Are we challenging a particular system, government, or machinery? And we need to study the persuasive elements of the text. What is it trying to tell us? What is it trying to achieve in terms of persuading people? Is it telling people from yes, we should be no, or from no, we should be yes? Those are persuasive elements of a text that will become rooted on the purpose of the author, that will be expounded, right, by the tone that the author is trying to convey, not in the literary piece or text. And we also need to be able to recognize the biases. When you're going to read critically, it is also a fact that you're also to become critical thinkers. which means that recognizing the bias of the author, the bias of the meaning or the message of the text is necessary. Bias in the connotation that it is not something negative. You're going to recognize the bias of the author based on how you were able to comprehend the literary text, not on whether the text is good or evil. No, it's not like that. You recognize the biases, whether it is bias to women empowerment, bias to the youth as part of nation building. Is it a bias of that? Or is it a bias about indigenous culture, indigenous people, tribes, practices, and traditions? What are the biases of the author? If you're a critical reader, you need to be able to recognize these as part of how you will become efficient in writing a critique. Remember, one of our end goals here is to write a critique, right? As with our essential question. So, in order for us to do that, we need to read the material. After reading the material, that's when we are going to derive the critique from. How do we do that? By critically reading the material. It may be done once, it may be done twice, or it may be done repeatedly. It's not really a question of how fast you are able to understand the material, but it's how critical you're able to dissect what the author is trying to convey, the purpose, the tone, how persuasive the elements were utilized, and the biases that are present, right? These are the three common goals that we see if we really try to analyze what we are reading on social media. These are the goals that authors who are credible, not just naysayers or bashers or those who give their opinions, whether they are backed up with evidences or not. If you're a credible author trying to publish something on social media, these are the three essential or three aspects that you are able to observe if you're also a critical reader, right? But if you are just someone who jumps the gun immediately, definitely you will be shot, headshot. Madara jud ka dayon because you're not critical about what you're reading. Or you would oppose immediately because you think that what you are reading is not meaningful or has no sense for you, right? So that's something that you need to consider. Now, in critical reading, we have different strategies. And when I say strategies, this may be applied personally or this may be considered, but not really applied in our day to day experiences. First, let's talk about previewing. Previewing is when or happens before we read a particular text. We preview it by gathering important information about it. If we are going to look at a text or if we are going to look at a book, what are the informations that we can see before we open the book and read chapter by chapter, page by page? Of course, we see the title, we see the author, we see the date of publication, the place of publication. From there, from those data, we are able to have our impression in terms of the primary data or the primary information reflected on the text. If it is a post online, you see the date of publication, you see who posted it or who published it, and you're able to scrutinize whether this is credible or not, whether this is a propaganda or not. So that's previewing. What do you think about a particular text before you read it? You gather first the most important information that you can gather about the text, and then from there, you try to form information or you try to form what is it about. You try to form this, unsay posible na kong makuha or makutlo when I read this in full. Now, here are the questions that we need to consider. Just like what I had said, who wrote the text? What are the author's other works? Is it really just one-sided, or is it also talking about the other parts or the other aspects of the argument? Example, is the author only anti-Marcos, or is the author also providing us with the good projects and achievements of the Marcos government back in the 70s and 80s? Is it just really circling about martial law, or is it also talking about how martial law happened, right? How martial law was declared, or why martial law was declared in the first place, and what is martial law? Because martial law is not something that is bad. It is something, or it is a power of the president to declare martial law if the state is in risks, right, of being controlled by terrorists, or there are possibilities, right? We don't declare it when it happens already. We declare it if there are early signs of rebellion, of terrorism in our localities, in our states. Where and when was the text published? You need to make this highlight. Kanus-a og asa. Because this particular time and place may be biased. So you need to talk about that. What were the major events around the time of the text was written or published? You need to identify those. What can you infer about the text based on the title? As I have said, you need to gather informations, important informations before you start reading the text. And you need to have or you need to infer. You need to talk about what could be in that particular text. Okay? What seems to be the general progression or the organization of ideas based on the chapter titles, the section headings, and other subheadings, and what is your purpose for reading the text? Do you want to be informed, educated? Do you want to be updated? Or do you just simply want to form a strong argument of your propaganda? You need to understand or you need to acknowledge the purpose of reading a particular text. Next, annotating. Annotating involves highlighting or making notes of important ideas in the text. Annotating is a skill commonly used by voracious readers or scholars that intend to learn deeper by just simply relying on the text that they are reading or they are studying. When we talk about annotating, we use pencils or pens to underline important ideas such as the thesis statement or the topic sentence or key concepts that we've come across. We also highlight unfamiliar words, and then when we come across the meaning to these unfamiliar words, we go back and relate it to bridge comprehension, to bridge the information that, okay, this is the meaning of this unfamiliar word. This is the context in which it is used or applied in this particular text that I am reading. We also need to make notes in order for us to remember that thought that we need to understand or to process within us. Remember, class, research have shown that a particular information would only last in your mind within the next 5 minutes because we receive information every time and we need not to secure a memory bank. Makalimot man gyud ang tao. So we need to make sure that we have ways and strategies in order for us to make sure that when we go back to this particular thought, idea, or concept, we're able to steer up what we want to learn out of this. Whether we ask question, we leave a note asking a question, we leave a note leaving a comment, or we make a note leaving a response to this particular idea or concept. How do we do that? We usually do that in the margins of the book. Or if you have sticky notes, you're fond of using sticky notes, you can maximize the space in the sticky notes. You can leave notes using sticky notes para pwede rin mo matanggal if you don't want to write on your book. On my end, I use sticky notes and I also write on my book, except in Bible diaries because it is something that I don't want to write anything. So in if I have a particular verse or idea that I would like to incorporate in any lecture that I give, I try to fold the tip of the page and I go back to it when I really need to review. If in cases of books, whether be it literature books or leadership books, novels or study books, I usually go for writing or underlining words or concepts that I really like. If taas kayo because it's one paragraph or two sentences, I usually put quotation para dili nako hugawan og tama na ako ang libro, but I still get to see, okay, this is the idea. This is the discussion that I want to learn or I want to incorporate in my discussions. You need to leave notes. If you're fond of leaving questions for you to answer later on, that's good. That's really deepening your understanding. If you want to leave responses, trying to come up, no, or cultivate your own understanding, your own perspective, or your own argument, you can also do that because you cannot compare and contrast, right? As you go along with your reading. You also need to develop a symbol system. What symbols are you going to put in place in order for you to remember or to mark important words or sentences? And you also need to make sure that as you go along with this symbol system, you are able to make sure that the text will not be cluttered. Meaning to say, dili pareha ang imong symbol on a particular text, Pero dili po balik-balik na kana na lang imong symbol sa tanan. If it is a question, then you leave a question mark. If it is a response, then you leave an arrow, double-sided arrow, right? When the tip of the arrow is in both ends, you leave that at that. You need to develop your own symbol system in order for you to be able to go back and to review the lesson, the idea that you were able to get or you were able to cultivate. Next, contextualizing. Contextualizing is when we consider the historical, cultural, and biographical context of the text. It is something that we put into perspective how we are able to summarize or organize how we understand a particular text, how we contextualize. Therefore, there is now the incorporation or the consideration of its historical, cultural, and biographical context of that particular text. That's why it's very important that we learn from the different contexts that we have discussed, biographical, sociocultural, and the linguistic, because we are able to decode meanings of a particular text if we look into those considerations. When was it written? What were the happenings during those times? What were the cultural influences during those times? And who was writing it? Right? Next, in outlining and summarizing, we need to consider the following. You need to identify the basic structure of the text and make connections between those ideas. Since we are trying to outline, then we are trying to organize, we are trying to pile a particular idea based on the connections it makes, right, on the basic structure of the text. Summarizing the text allows you to present your understanding of the text by reviewing and synthesizing important ideas and then restating them in your own words. This is something that is very difficult for us to do nowadays. Restating them in your own words. You may be able to restate them, but definitely the restatement is incorrect. Incorrect in the aspect of grammar, incorrect in the aspect of usage of sentences, terminologies that are inadequate with what we are trying to state in our own words. And most of all, when we are going to summarize, there is an important part where we need to synthesize important ideas wherein when we state them in our own words, it is something correct, accurate, or effective, right? Nga tama jud sa kung unsang imong idea nga ginastate. Next, analyzing. Analyzing a text deals with examining the information presented to support authors' arguments. When we talk about analyzing a particular text, we need to look into the information that is being presented. If it coincides, if it supports or strengthens the author's arguments, or if it is a contradiction to the argument of the author. That's effective analysis. Because if you're just going to be one sided with your analysis, ultimately, if there is going to be a debate of sorts, you will ultimately fall into your own one sided analysis, right? Now, in doing so, let's consider the following. Is there enough evidence to support the author's argument? Does the evidence relate to or support the thesis or the main point the author is trying to convey? Are the pieces of evidence relevant, credible, and up to date? Let's remember SMART, the mnemonic SMART, remember? Uh, Specific, measurable, attainable, right? Realistic and time bounded. We also need to talk about the credibility of the sources of the information. And why did the author take the particular position in that discussion? Why did he or she said yes or stood no in that discussion or in that argument? What is the author's background that may have led to or influenced his or her position? We need to talk about that in terms of properly and effectively analyzing a particular text, right? Rereading. This is something that we are very, very lacking because this is going through the whole text over again. Sometimes people don't reread because it is tiring. Tapulan man ta in nature. So di na ta mo reread, labi nagtaas kayo, isa ka libro gid mo kailangan i-reread. You do not have strategies, you don't annotate, you don't form analysis along the way. So definitely there is a need for you to reread for you to understand. Rereading requires repeated examination of the text that will enable you to improve your comprehension of the text. Hence, you are also able to identify ideas that you may not have noticed in the initial reading. And this is something that is true. I have had so many books that I have finished reading in one going. Nahuman ako siya basa, but at the end of it, I only remember 20%. So when I need to utilize those topics in those books to expound my discussions, I go back to it. And that's when I learn or comprehend it best, because there is no improvement of what you have understood in the first time you've read it, and you are now able to incorporate it based on the experiences that you had. Because what you read, class, the majority of it will fall in your subconscious mind. The rest of it that you remember, it is on your conscious mind. You keep on remembering it. But depending on how you were able to apply it or how you were able to encounter it, that's all going to fall into how well you are going to scour the subconscious mind in remembering. So when you go back and you read again, you repeat, examine a particular text, that's when you are able to comprehend best. If you were really able to understand that idea in that particular text or nalibog ka. And that's the chance for you to correct that confusion, to be able to incorporate, no, and expound the learnings based from what you have read and based from what you have experienced, or how you were able to apply this particular concept in your day-to-day activities. And that is something that is very useful. Next, responding. Responding to the text means drawing meaning from what you have read and present it in writing or talking about it to others. Responding in the sense that you don't just only read the text, but most of all, there is drawing meaning out of it. You get meaning out of what you have read, and importantly, you present it. You try to present it, you try to sell it through reading or through writing or talking about it to others, and see if you also, or if you were able to develop or to draw out the same meaning with them, right? Or you can evaluate whether you need to improve on your comprehension of the subject matter, or you can stand with your principle, you can stand on your argument about the subject matter, right? Now here is a poem or a literary text championing the right to age well by the newsusa.com. I want you to study and I want you to become critical in terms of understanding the guide questions of this particular article. In this article, we are incorporating what we have discussed in terms of critical reading strategies. So from the title itself, what are you able to preview? In the previewing stage, what are you able to understand with this title, Championing the Right to Age Well? And since that this is based from the context of the United States, what is the important lesson that you may get out of this? Just simply by looking at the title and the source of this material. Now, in doing so, let us now talk about the values of this lesson. We have learned how the use of critical reading strategies allows us to fully analyze, interpret, evaluate, and respond to text. How can these strategies help and protect us amid rampant distractions and fake news? We know that these days, when we say that fake news is an epidemic, is an understatement. Now that you have learned the different strategies to become critical readers and critical thinkers, how are we able to utilize these strategies to help and protect ourselves from fake news that is circling around social media or the World Wide Web? How are we able to determine, to filter, and to scrutinize and regulate the information that we feed ourselves? We need to think about that. Good day, and I hope that you were able to refresh and learn again the discussions that we've had in class.